Right, no, of course.
Somebody in prison doesn't have the same free speech rights that you
Right,
have.
but what's the first thing that you have to do if you want to vote in this country? You have to register, right? So it's a federal registration to be able to vote in this country. So why not, and we can agree that, keeping safe and, keeping our elections to where people who shouldn't vote aren't voting is, that's keeping America safe, because we don't want people who
That's a fair point. I would say there's there's a technical difference between a voter registration roll and a gun registration
Right, guns
roll.
are much more dangerous.
Well, also, but guns in many different ways, they would go after the guns a lot more than the voter registration roll.
Well,
My worldview comes out of one in the 20th century.
Gun debates are never straightforward, and emotions often run high on both sides. But when people stop talking past each other and actually engage, the conversation can be both revealing and worth unpacking. In this particular exchange, a student pressed for tighter restrictions on firearms, while Charlie Kirk pushed back with arguments rooted in liberty, historical context, and the original intent of the Second Amendment. Instead of just repeating slogans, both sides laid out positions that touched on deeper issues: safety, freedom, and the balance between individual rights and collective responsibility. By looking closely at their exchange, we can separate the stronger points from the weaker ones and see where the discussion sheds light versus where it simply adds more noise.
Hey, Charlie, how are you? So I just had a question on your thoughts on if we need more gun control in the country or not. I'm very pro protecting America and the citizens that live in it, and so I think that we should have more gun control, because there's a lot of school shootings that happen, as we mentioned, and I just think it would do a lot to protect people. And I think the Second Amendment also qualifies that we should have regulations for guns. I wanted to know your thoughts on that.
Sure. Do you think gun ownership is a right or a privilege?
I think it's a right, but it comes with responsibilities.
Okay, tell me more.
Well, I think that there should be things in place, things like red flag laws and things like that. The AG just approved Mel Gibson to get his gun rights back, even though he had a domestic violence charge. So, I don't think the people that commit these violent crimes should be able to buy guns and things like that. And I think we should have red flag laws in place to make sure that those violent criminals aren't getting guns.
Okay, so let's go. So tell me, in your perfect world, what would constitute a red flag?
Just things like, we can look into any kind of medication and things like that that can affect someone's...
That could be dangerous, right? That could be there's a lot of vets that come home from war and that are on a lot of medication. A lot of vets could have their weapons taken away.
Well, I'm not necessarily saying... Bless you. Bless you.
Thank you. It's the pollen or something. Thank you.
I'm not necessarily saying, it's mainly to prevent, future shootings and things like that, and also... putting in place things like a federal registry so that we know, the types of guns that people have. And, it would just essentially be a federal registry that shows these are the guns that this person has, in case a cop has to go on something like a domestic call. That's the most dangerous call they can go on. So,
yeah, I can see you're coming after this from a good perspective. Let me ask one other question. What would you say is the ultimate and final purpose of the Second Amendment?
I think it's self-defense against a tyrannical government, which...
We agree. Sure. Great. Keep going.
Well, but I think within the Second Amendment, it also implies that we have high regulations in the first 4 words.
Sort of. Well-regulated militia actually meant well-armed, but that's a separate issue. But
well, how do you know? You're interpreting what the Founding Fathers
Well, they said it in the Federalist Papers, right? So it's not just me, but also in the Heller decision, in the 5-4 decision, that said that gun ownership was a right. This was a hotly debated thing.
But do you disagree? Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you. Do you disagree with the idea of a federal registry like that?
Oh, without a doubt. The only reason you'd want to register the guns is if you want to confiscate them.
Well, or to make sure that people like officers of the law are protected and know what they're going into.
That's a good argument.
Right.
To your credit, I will try to make a better argument where the problem of the government knowing where every gun is would then lead itself towards mass confiscation. And I would agree with you, a well-armed citizenry is the greatest protectorate of liberty and freedom in this country.
Even though the Army has things like drones and tanks and things like that outarm, citizens that have...
Yes and no. We've seen it in several instances where at least a citizen... That's a good argument, but I would say a little flawed, where the citizens are able to protect...
Right from the start, the clash becomes clear. The student acknowledges that the right to own firearms exists, but argues it should come with conditions, pointing to ideas like red flag laws and mandatory registries as safeguards. On the other side, Charlie Kirk pushes back, warning that each new layer of regulation isn't just about safety. It's another step that hands power to the government. This exchange captures the heart of the debate. One side elevates security and prevention above all else, while the other insists that freedom must remain the first priority. It's a familiar collision, safety versus liberty, and it shows why this issue has remained so fiercely contested in America for generations.
In some ways, it's a much harder population to control.
I understand, but so you think a federal registry would infringe on the rights?
Potentially. I mean, I think that there's no good argument, I think, other than potential. I ascribe to the government bad motives and bad intentions when it wants to infringe more on these types of freedoms and liberties.
Well, I understand. I just personally don't see it as an infringement because, like we just said, and I think we agreed that owning a gun is a right. However,
Yes.
I think it's responsibilities. But also, I wanted to ask: is voting a right or is that a privilege?
Well, it is a right, and so felons can get their rights back, right? And
Right.
but rights can be suspended or delayed, and we
Right,
both agree
but-
with that. So,
right,
for
but-
example, like somebody in prison doesn't get guns.
Right. No, of course.
Somebody in prison doesn't have the same free speech rights that you
Right,
might have.
but what's the first thing that you have to do if you want to vote in this country? You have to register, right? So it's a federal registration to be able to vote in this country. So why not, and we can agree that, keeping safe and, keeping our elections to where people who shouldn't vote aren't voting is, that's keeping America safe because we don't want people who
That's a
can't
fair
vote.
point. I would say there's something that there's a technical difference between a voter registration roll and a gun registration
Right, guns
roll.
are much more dangerous.
Well, also, but guns in many different ways, they would go after the guns a lot more than the voter registration roll.
Well, how do we know, though?
My worldview comes out of one in the 20th century, where almost every totalitarian government went after the guns first, and the confiscation of guns then leads into the erosion of freedom and liberty.
Right, but wouldn't you say in the 20th century, as you just said, that the disparity between the technology that citizens had to protect themselves compared to what the military had, wouldn't you say that there was a much smaller disparity as opposed to what we see
Somewhat.
nowadays?
I think that's a fair point.
So,
I'm acknowledging that's a fair point.
okay. But
Do you see my perspective as well?
No, I do
that,
understand.
That in
It's-
armed citizenry, also it says shall not be infringed, so we have to kind of wrestle with those two things
right, but
simultaneously.
so if it's just a semantics argument, then to that point,
It's not. I mean, semantics is meaning. That's literally what the word means. But
right, but
so,
you're saying because it says shall not be infringed, we can't do anything.
No,
Does that
I'm
mean,
saying,
does that
though,
mean
that
voting rights can be
I'm
infringed
saying
because it doesn't say it cannot be infringed.
I'm saying I err on the side that more government regulation around guns means that they'll try to take good people's guns away, which then results in less global or let's just say national freedom and liberty.
What if getting the medicine you need didn't have to be so hard? No waiting weeks to see a doctor, no fighting with insurance. That's why I want to tell you about All Family Pharmacy. They believe in medical freedom, and they're changing the way people get the medications they trust. Just go online and pick up what you need. Things like ivermectin, hydroxychloroquine, NAD+, methylene blue, antibiotics, and more than 200 other medications. A licensed doctor reviews your orders, writes the prescription, and your medicine shows up at your door in a few days. You do not need insurance, you don't need to beg a doctor, just simple, fast, honest care. Check them out and get 10% off your order today. Go to allfamilypharmacy.com/Kirk and use promo code Kirk10 to get 10% off.
I understand, but wouldn't you say that that more guns can?
One interesting moment is where both sides actually find common ground. They agree that people with violent criminal histories should not have access to firearms. But that agreement doesn't last long. The divide shows up almost immediately when the issue of trust enters the picture. The student places confidence in the government's ability to regulate fairly and enforce safeguards. Kirk, however, takes the opposite stance, arguing that once the state is given more authority, history shows it tends to stretch that power, often to the detriment of ordinary citizens. That core disagreement on trust versus skepticism becomes the driving force behind the rest of their exchange, shaping every argument that follows.
Potentially lead to more danger and less guns?
Yes
lead
and
to less
no.
danger?
I mean, there's plenty of evidence to show that states that have more, so like if you take Houston and Chicago, about comparable populations, Houston actually has warmer weather, which means potentially more gang violence. They have about half, if not even less, the amount of homicides per year than in Chicago. Chicago has much stricter gun laws than Houston, like incredibly strict gun laws.
I understand, but I'm also, I think part of what plays into that is the gun laws that are around those cities. They're a lot more lenient than those cities themselves. So I think, I'm not saying that's entirely the cause of it, but I'm saying
I've heard
that's
that my whole life, so yeah.
right. But I'm basically just talking about preventing people that have committed crimes such as domestic violence. I know I mentioned Pam Bondi gave Mel Gibson his rights to purchase a gun again, even though he pled guilty to battery domestic violence charge in 2011, and yet now he is able to purchase a gun again, which I disagree with because he committed a violent crime. I mean, do you disagree with that person?
No, I mean, I don't know the details of the case, but I think I've met Mel Gibson. I think he should be able to own a gun. I mean, like
just off of speaking to him though, even though with his criminal history.
I don't know all the details. Do I think that the idea of taking his rights away because of something that happened that I don't know all the details about 14 years ago?
To it though.
Again, I find that to be a little bit of an infringement on basic rights.
Even though he
again, I don't know the details around that, but I guess we're getting to a place where do you think anyone that's convicted of violent crime should be able to own guns again?
No, not at all.
Wow,
if they're committing a violent crime, absolutely not. I think we should protect people in America, which I think you agree with, and I think
that's a balance. Are we going to really say the federal government is going to protect us from ourselves when it comes to guns?
No, I mean it's less about the federal government taking away guns and more just allowing them to protect their citizens. And it's not about getting rid of guns. I'm a gun owner myself. I go hunting. I was on a competitive team.
What state would you say has the gun laws that are the most appealing to your worldview?
I don't know specific state laws, if I'm being completely honest with you, but
something to think about.
But I'm speaking, even just the federal registry itself. I think that would protect, a lot of officers of the law. Like I said, when they go on domestic calls, that's the most dangerous call that an officer of the law can go on.
There's an informal registry, not a formal one. Just gun dealers are supposed to report.
Right, but do you really think that they do all the time, though?
No, of course not, obviously. I mean,
right,
I
so
live in
wouldn't the
reality.
federal registry eliminate that problem, then?
Again, I would go back to a formal registry. You register in order to confiscate. It is a prerequisite towards confiscation.
Isn't that just a slippery slope argument, though? If you give one thing, then another thing
it's a historical argument, right? We see that throughout totalitarian dictatorships throughout the 20th century, where if you want to take the weapons away, you first ask for a collection of all the items that you then want to collect. But I could see you're coming after this in good faith. I tend to be on a much more libertarian side, even though I'm not libertarian, where we actually need looser gun laws because I think that
gun laws?
Oh yeah. I mean, especially in states like Chicago and Illinois, where it's very basic Second Amendment rights. So I'll give you a great example. Okay. In a state like Rhode Island or New York, it could take a woman upwards of 30 days to get a gun. So let's say a man wants to actually do harm to her, and she gets threats and the police won't intervene. I think she should be able to get a gun that afternoon to protect herself.
I understand that.
So in that case, I think that gun laws should be looser.
I understand.
I think
in that regard, I do agree with you.
Cool. So that would be an instance of that. And I also will go back to this idea of red flag laws. We have seen case after case of it being abused, of veterans having their weapons taken away because of fake accusations and, let's just say, faulty accusations, saying that they're mentally unbalanced, so on and so forth.
But do you think that they could investigate cases like that and see if there aren't any medications?
By the end, they actually find a surprising sliver of common ground: mandatory training to reduce accidental shootings. It's rare in debates like this, but that small overlap shows that even polarized positions can share a thread of agreement.
I mean, a lot of these antidepressants can change your brain chemistry.
For sure, and some of it, though, is they take the guns away first and they ask questions after. It's a difficult, very, I don't want to say gray area, but edge part of the law, where I tend to, and a respectable position, respect to you, I tend to err on the side of it is a right, the government screws up more than it does correct in this specific portion, and the downside to having more guns is far better than the downside of having only the government have guns.
Even if that can cost American lives, though? I mean, me personally, I would give up all of my guns in a heartbeat if I knew for a fact that it was going to save one life.
Can I do a thought experiment to you?
Sure.
So, do you think we should ban driving?
No, I don't think so. And I know where you're going with this.
55,000 people a year die from car accidents, right?
Right, so absolutely. But those are accidents, though. That's not someone intentionally going and killing somebody. Well, that's not true. Some people intentionally do, or some people have DUIs, right? Some of it is an act of agency, not just accidents, right? Meaning that they are reckless with the technology. I understand.
You would agree a DUI is a reckless act.
Oh, for sure.
And that's a vast majority of auto deaths, both in the interior of the vehicle and the exterior.
Right, but then what do you have to do to be able to drive, though? You have to get a driver's license. You have to take a test with an instructor.
No, of course, but I'm saying if the pursuit of to save, if it's all about saving lives, then there are certain things that we'd get rid of. I would say, though, that government is not merely there for our safety. It's one of the primary focuses. You have to balance liberty and safety. And that's a tough balance at times. I fall on this issue on the side of liberty. Final thought.
So what? Yeah, just one last quick question, I promise. What about something, as I mentioned, with taking a driving test to be able to get a driver's license, you have to prove that you know how to operate the vehicle safely. What about something similar to that with owning a gun? Some kind of thing where you go to a range with a trained professional,
No.
you show that you know how to operate the gun, safely, know how to store it safely, things like that. Yet,
Yeah, I mean,
and then
so-
once you pass that, you get some kind of card that allows you to buy a gun.
I
It's all
think
about
that,
protections. It's not about
yes,
restricting
on
rights.
that you might have some agreement with me, because actually the number one cause of errant gun deaths is accidental discharges. People that don't know what they're doing with their gun.
I understand.
And so I think that could be prevented through better training. So for that, I actually might have some middle ground.
Okay, I appreciate it. Hope you and your family had a blessed Easter. God
Thank
bless
you.
everybody.
God bless you. Great job. Thank you.
All right, let's pull together what we just saw in those clips. The student began with a straightforward argument. The right to own firearms is real, but rights come with responsibilities. His case rested on the idea that policies such as red flag laws, registries, and thorough background checks could prevent violent offenders from gaining access to weapons and give law enforcement better tools to keep communities safe. It's a familiar position. Control the access without eliminating the right altogether. Charlie Kirk pushed in the opposite direction. For him, the Second Amendment isn't primarily about sport or even home defense. It's about protecting citizens from the possibility of government overreach. From his perspective, once registries and restrictions enter the picture, the door to confiscation is already cracked open. He draws from history, arguing that oppressive governments almost always disarm their people before tightening control. His framing shifts the discussion from crime prevention to a broader struggle, liberty versus tyranny. Compromise isn't always about giving up. It's about refining ideas until they work better. This debate highlighted more than just guns. It highlighted how we frame rights, safety, and trust in government. Do we believe the state acts in good faith? Or do we assume it's always reaching for more control? Do we see regulation as protection or as erosion of freedom? These aren't questions with easy answers, but what conversations like this reveal is where our fears and hopes intersect. Progress may not come from one side winning, but from those rare moments when both admit the other has at least one point worth considering.